I'm sure she will introduce herself a bit more, and she will also give us a fascinating talk on badgers and the wildlife of the Peak District. Tess, do you want to take it away?
Sure, thank you, Rachel. So, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for choosing to record Strictly Come Dancing rather than watching it live. So, yeah, my name is Tesni. I am a full-time wildlife photographer based on the other side of the Peak District, so I'm actually in Chesterfield. And I've been doing it for about 4.5, coming up to 5 years now as sole income. And obviously the Peak District is right on my doorstep, so that's where I do a majority of my work. So as Rachel said, if you've got any questions at any point, please feel free to ask in the chat box, to unmute yourself briefly, or just wait until the end. I'm completely flexible and I'm happy to answer any question whatsoever. If it's about the animal, if it's about the photography, if it's about my favorite alcoholic tipple, whatever you'd like to know, please just ask and I will be happy to answer as we go along. So just before we start, I'm just curious. Can you put your thumbs up if you do some photography, even if it's just a dabble once in a while? Okay, so we've got quite a few thumbs going up. For the people who don't have the thumbs up, hopefully I will convert you by the end of the night, or maybe not, we will see.
Oh no, sorry, no, sorry. No, I've just stopped pointing. I know, I'm just unmuting her. Oh no, shit.
Little red microphone.
I know.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, don't worry.
Sorry, I'll stop there.
No, you're fine. Don't worry. So, we begin. So I'm sure that many of you will be in some way familiar with the Peak District, as I'm sure many of you are very fortunate to live within it. And I've been fascinated with the national park for 10 to 15 years. That's about the time I've lived in the area. I absolutely adore it. And when I started photography, I was doing a mixture of landscapes and wildlife. I love to be able to capture the scenery, the stunning places like Winnet's Pass, but I also really enjoyed photographing the residents that lived within the national park boundary. But one of the real struggles when you're trying to do photography and you are trying to juggle two types is usually you need to be doing them both at the same time of day. That's very early in the morning when the sun is rising and at sunset as well. And whenever I was given the choice, do I go out and do landscapes? Do I do wildlife? I always picked wildlife. There's something just so engaging about getting out there, finding animals, watching them, and hopefully photographing them as well. So I made the decision that I wanted to specialize in wildlife, and it kind of went from there. And now I am very fortunate that this is my job. Now, obviously things with COVID and lockdown and all of that has made this year a little bit disastrous. So unfortunately the photography has had to take a little bit of a back burner. But it's meant that when we have been able to go out, I've been exploring, trying to find new locations and new wildlife that's worth photographing. But we have such a wild variety. One of my favourite birds within the Peak District, although there's a lot of controversy surrounding them, is red grouse. These birds have gumption. They have so much personality and charisma. They are little balls of attitude, essentially. And I'm fortunate that I only have to drive about 20-25 minutes to get to the nearest site. And usually I try and stick with specific individuals. Now, I have a little bit of a running joke with grouse. They're always named with something beginning with F. So if there's a boy, it's always called Frank. And if it's a girl, they're always called Fiona. I don't know why, but it kind of just was a little bit of a trend that stuck. And again, I love them both for their uniqueness. The guys are usually pretty feisty. If you find the right individual, they can practically walk up to your feet and start giving you an earful. Whereas the females are a lot more slender, a little bit calmer, but still equally beautiful in their own way. And one of the bird species that I also quite love, but have not been able to find and have as much success with, is little owls. when you spend so much time working with specific species and specific individuals, you really start to see their personalities start to shine through. And this allows, you just have to look at them to see they're pretty quirky. They are absolutely gorgeous. And I'm hoping that I've secured a site next spring to be able to work with them more exclusively. But it's not just the bigger species or the birds that interest me, it's also some of the smaller ones as well. So some of you may have come across certain reptiles when you've been out on your adventures, and common lizards happen to be one of my favourites again. So usually a full-grown adult is only about this big. They are not very large, and you'll often find them basking on rocks, on wood, on fence posts. But it can be really difficult to bring out their personality because they spend a hell of a lot of time sunbathing against a wall, and once they reach the right temperature, they flit off. You don't see them again. And I was very fortunate when I found this particular female. She was right at the bottom of a fence post. It was perfect conditions. It was absolutely glorious. So I was just shooting through the grass. She was basking on the bottom of the fence post, and then she actually turned to face the camera. So it was a really nice sort of minimal connection with her, just showing a little bit more about these animals rather than just, I'm going to lie here and sunbathe, which they do a lot of. We do also have a few, well, obviously cows. I actually love cows, even though they are domestic. And Baslow Edge is one of the locations I usually went to visit them. There's obviously been a couple of issues up there the past couple of years, but these, they're just stunning. I absolutely adore them. For me personally, I actually have Briards, if anyone knows those, as a dog. And Briards are basically Highland cows without the horns. So I really do feel a little bit of a connection to these guys as well. But don't get too close because obviously they have massive horns and you don't want to end up on the end of one. And one of the more elusive species that we do have in the Peak District in certain locations is water voles. Now, water voles are one of the worst hit mammals in the UK in terms of population decline. And I have watched over the past 5 or 6 years when I've been trying to do photography more seriously, as populations at certain locations have dropped and dropped and dropped. So there's some sites where I used to be able to go and I was guaranteed to see 5-10 individuals in a single day. And now I'm lucky if I see 1 or 2. And it's pretty sad to see this happening so quickly. But there are still a few strongholds where you can see them and photograph them. And it's just such a joy when you hear a little plop as they pop into the water and seeing them scurry along the water's edge, feeding, going about their day-to-day activity. And one of the things that I love doing with them is I will put my entire tripod and pretty much the base of the camera in the water, and I'll remotely control this, so I have to pick my location appropriately. I knew that this particular log was actually a latrine. So with water voles, they have fixed territories and they will usually mark the edges with latrines. So I can almost guarantee that at some point during the day, a water vole is going to come along. And I was very fortunate on this particular day, there was a juvenile that popped along. And I was, well, I wasn't actually photographing, I was controlling it with my iPad. I have no control over the angle or the shot that it's taking, and I can't actually reach my camera. So it was a little bit of a problem when the voles chose to actually sit on my camera, use it as a bit of a prop, which meant that the entire lens was covered in water, and I just had to sit there. I could see what the camera could see on my phone, thinking, this is cute, but it's ruined the rest of the day shooting because I can't go and get the camera. But luckily I was able to get a few shots before they started being a little bit mischievous. And another reptile, which you can obviously see during spring, summer, and sometimes if we have a warm autumn as well, is the adder. Now, adders are the only native venomous snake that we have in the UK. And I adore them again. Even though they don't necessarily do very much, those colours and the sheen on their scales is stunning. And it can be really joyful to just sit there and watch them as they're basking. There's quite a difference between the males and females as well. And if you do have a site where you can go and see them, maintain a little bit of distance. We don't want to disturb them, but just sit back, watch and enjoy the moment. And again, it's really, really fun to try and photograph them when they actually do something, which is not very often. And we've obviously got quite a few smaller bird species as well. Great spotted woodpeckers, you will often hear and see them flitting about on the treetops. Now, I'm very fortunate that there's a nest that I know of, 5-minute walk from where I live. And luckily I can sit behind a stone brick wall, and there's one of the animal passing holes down beneath it. So I can actually shoot through that. The birds never know I'm there, and I can watch them going about feeding the young as well. But I really, really do enjoy seeing these birds, and I hope to see a lesser spotted woodpecker at some point, because I know they're about, but they're notoriously difficult to find. And one of the seasons that's just finished is the deer rut. So I'm sure a couple of you may have gone for a walk around Big Moor at some point, or maybe at Chatsworth, and seen these incredible animals. So it's usually during October. It was a little bit of an unusual year this year because it was quite warm. It can really impact the routines of these animals. So you may have seen reports that there was actually a white deer up on Big Moor. And there was, but it was actually a fallow deer. But it was really, really nice to see this because it is a rarer pelt colour in the Peak District. But the reds are the main spectacle. They are incredible, and you can often hear them long before you actually see them. So I spent quite a few days up on the moors this year. It was pretty darn awesome, to be honest. There were 5 or 6 harems within a very, very small proximity. And we saw some close fights. Usually what they'll actually do is they'll posture. They'll try and make themselves look bigger and more impressive so that they don't end up fighting. But it does occasionally happen. And it's pretty dramatic, to say the least. But they don't want to fight because it can have really bad results. Luckily, I didn't see any injuries or problems this year, but there was one particular male who had a massive scar on his shoulder. But luckily, he was able to keep hold of his ladies throughout the rut. I'm pretty sure he was rather successful with them, thankfully. But it's really important to appreciate some of the more common species that we have in the Peak District. So it's really easy to be walking along. Let's say you're walking in Buxton. You're probably going to come across a mallard or a goose or a swan when you're near bodies of water. Because we see them every day, we think, it's a goose. So what? The thing is, if you think to the grass is greener on the other side. So there was a report in China about a year ago, a Eurasian robin turned up there. Now to us, we see robins every day, or probably every day, so it's not a big deal. But when this robin turned up in China, there were literally hundreds of photographers and bird watchers lining up desperate to get a sighting of this bird because it's not the norm for them. And if we think about it with that perspective, you can really gain an appreciation for some of these more common species. Canada geese can be a pain, let's be honest, but they can also be pretty awesome. When I'm sat on the edge of a body of water trying to photograph them, you can guarantee there'll be one trying to peck me on the shoulder, bugging me for food, want some attention. But again, you just really gain an appreciation for their personalities the longer you spend with them. And swans are another great example. Some people are afraid of these birds for good reason. They are quite large. If they don't like the look of you, they're going to make a horrific hissing noise. And there's obviously the rumours out there that they will break a bone as well if you're not careful. But the reality is they can be gentle giants as well. And there's actually 3 males at one reservoir right on the outskirts of the Peak District, where I've essentially fallen in love with them. I'm a little bit annoyed that there's 3 males, because if it was a mating pair, I would be able to get some wonderful photos of cygnets as well. But this is just a little bit of a bachelor group. And again, if you popped these guys into a country where they never saw them, everybody would lose it. So don't feel like just because we see them every day, they don't have value. I would argue they really do. And that even extends to mallards. Now, when I tell people I actually do a strict mallard project during winter, they look at me like, are you that desperate that you're photographing mallards? Truth is, I actually adore these birds. A lot of people don't know that they're actually amber listed on the RSPB. Just because they are common now does not mean they are going to be common in 20, 30, 40 years down the line. And if you think back to when water voles were pretty much everywhere, you would be almost guaranteed to see them when you were walking along a canal or a river. There probably wouldn't have been as much hype to try and photograph or see them, whereas now they are rarer. Everybody wants to get out with a camera or catch a glimpse of them. And again, we don't know what's going to happen down the line. Mallards could become a rarer species. And if these guys only popped up once every 6 months, everybody would lose it. The plumage and colours on their feathers are just stunning. And I've come to really like them actually. They've got quite unique personalities. Now I'm going to do a little bit of a challenge for you guys. I'm going to make the assumption that you have at some point walked around the peaks, maybe across the moorlands. This is a Peak District landscape, and within it there is one single animal. Now there's actually an annotate tool. I believe it's in view and then annotate. I am challenging you. You have 3 minutes to find the animal within this. You can speak amongst yourselves. If you want to try and help each other, please feel free. But just try and find it and see if you can circle it on the little map. So I'm just going to add a little. There we go. So there's a little hint for you in terms of what we're looking for. Oh, yeah. So pretty much every single time I show this, people go for the golden egg, guaranteed. Unfortunately, the golden egg is just a golden rock, but you're on the right lines. I always have the fun of watching the webcams of everybody looking during this as well, and everybody looking up nice and close on the on the screen. You've got 1.5 minutes left. If you can't figure it out, just go, oh, hello. Who's going to admit to being the blue circle? You can't circle a circle. That's cheating, whoever's done that. Who did the blue circle?
We did.
Is that Donna?
Yeah.
Can you refine it?
Oh.
Refine where within that circle you're looking.
Oh gosh, is it?
There you go. You've got it. Perfect. Any guesses as to what it is?
No.
If you look at my fantastic 5-star drawing,
Mountain hare.
Mountain hare.
It's a mountain hare, yes. Perfect. Well, congratulations, because I found on Zoom this is very hard, so you've done a damn good job finding it. So yes, that is a mountain hare. Let me just clear that all up. And ironically, that mountain hare is called Frank. Obviously, he's not a grouse, but if anyone's watched Donnie Darko, it was inspired by that. And mountain hares during winter are my main project. The mallards are a side project. And we are very, very fortunate that the Peak District is home to the only English population of mountain hares. They're brown during summer, and during winter, due to an evolutionary adaptation, they turn white. The idea is it helps them blend into their surroundings. But you can see here, Frank is white, no snow whatsoever, but he still blends in pretty darn well. So if you can see my mouse, he's literally just above it, facing down towards the lower left corner. So his head's just there and his bum is back there. So despite the fact that every year winter becomes warmer and warmer, we have less and less snow, thankfully these guys are still doing a pretty good job. Now, they were brought over in the late 1800s. Unfortunately, they were brought down from Scotland for shooting purposes, but they have survived to the modern day. And I'm sure you will have seen flits of white if you've been out hiking over the moors as a mountain hare pelts off into the distance. These guys are fabulous, but also a complete and utter nightmare when it comes to trying to photograph them. So usually I'm looking for specific individuals who have the right temperament and traits. And this is the first ever Peak District star hare for me. And this chap was called Hamish. Now, I had the pleasure of photographing Hamish for 2 years. Unfortunately, mountain hares only have an average lifespan of 2 to 4 years. So I can only suspect what his age was. I think he was around 3 years old, given the size of him when I first saw him, but I always knew that it was Hamish. They usually like to stick within a certain territorial range, and also, again, they are individuals. So they would show certain behaviours. With Hamish, he was quite tolerant as long as you approached in the right way. And he had certain behaviours and triggers that always told me it's him. Main one was his yawn. He was quite a tired guy. I think he did a lot overnight that made him, sluggish and tired during the day. And he would always yawn twice. He never only yawned once. And he would cock his jaw one way and he would stick his tongue out the other way, and he would look an absolute treat. But I never really saw hares behave like this, so I always knew that it was Hamish. Now, hares are nocturnal. They're active at night, not during the day, but you can still see them because they don't live in burrows. They'll usually sit themselves in a form. They like to have their back sheltered so that nothing can sneak up on them. It also shelters them from the conditions. So it's another reason why I'm looking for specific individuals, because some hares will literally do nothing but sleep for 7 hours. And you'll be sat there eager and waiting with the camera thinking, do something please. I'm cold and I'm wet and I would love a photo by now. But you find those individuals that are more active and more eager to do bits and bobs during the day, then hopefully your time and discomfort is best placed and you'll walk away with some awesome pictures. Now, they do become a lot trickier to find in summer because they just blend in like you wouldn't believe. And also they'll often sit themselves bang smack in the middle of a tussock of heather. So unless you accidentally nearly step on it, you're probably never going to know that it's there. So for me personally, I try to not go out looking for them during the spring and summer. I really don't want to step on a leveret. I don't want to disturb ground nesting birds. And I know that it's very, very tricky to get any results. But I do sometimes work with them in August into September when they still have that beautiful, beautiful brown fur. But hopefully there's not going to be any other things to disturb when you're out trying to find them. But my favourite species in the Peak District, I'm sure you can figure out what it is by now, given the title of the talk. Now, I genuinely love every animal and every species that I work with, but none have captivated me in the way that badgers have. Just curious, put a thumb up if you've ever seen a live badger. I want to see how many people have had the pleasure. Okay, a few people. That's good. So I'm sure if you have seen them, you will know why I love them as much as I do. I think one of the things that really attracted me to them was how heavily misunderstood they are and how they are portrayed to the wider world. So when I initially decided I want to photograph badgers, I have never seen a live badger before. I've only seen them on the side of the road. The idea was this is going to be a one-year project. I'm going to photograph and document them for 1 year, and that will free up time so that next year I can go and do foxes or stoats or weasels or something else. Yep, I think Rachel mentioned it, 2,000 plus hours down the line, that did not go to plan in any way, shape or form. These guys are by far the top species in the entire world I have ever had the privilege of photographing. And over the course of 5 years, I have seen generation after generation be born, grow, and move on. So you can see here, there's a little bit of a family tree. Now, this family tree is incomplete, partially because lockdown stopped me from working with them as much as I'd like this year, but also it can be quite tricky to fully identify individuals until they're a little bit older. Now, there's a lot of conflicting information out there about badgers, and that's because they're just not very well understood. For me, at this particular set, I call it the Elder Clan, the cubs do not leave until they are 2 years of age. They have never left earlier than that. So that gives me plenty of time to observe and watch them as their personality develops, as their face and their structure changes, and I can pick out the individuals. And often people ask, how can you tell? They all look very similar. The more time you spend with them, the more the little details stand out. And it's not just the way that they look, it's also the way that they behave. Now, I have spent far too long with these animals, and I'm often asked as well, you're not bored? Do you not have every photo you could ever imagine needing? And the answer is no, I will never, ever be bored. Even the times when I go down to the set and I go home with an empty memory card, I genuinely don't care. Because these guys, to me, are my extended fur family. If I could scoop them all up, pop them in the car, and then pop them in my garden, I would do it in a heartbeat. And the one that really started it all off for me was Luna. Now, Luna is the dominant sow. I have been seeing her from the first time I ever visited the set, and she has captivated me so much, I actually have a tattoo of her on my shoulder. Now, she is usually the mum to 3 or 4 cubs every single year. Now, when I first started working with badgers, I was very cautious because I'd been told, ooh, they're aggressive. You've got to be careful, they might bite you. I was a little bit nervous, if I'm honest. And from the first encounter, I realized I don't need to be at all. I'd found the set that morning, and I decided I'm going to go back in the evening and I'm going to try and get a picture. I don't know if I'm going to succeed. I'm probably not, but this is the first set I found. Fingers crossed. And I was sat on a badger path. I was about 30 meters from the set entrances. And I was all lined up, all ready, eager, and I hear something snap behind me. Now, people often say you've got to be really careful with your movement around badgers. They'll smell you, they'll hear you, and although their eyesight is pretty dire, if you move, they can see movement. So I very, very, very cautiously turned to look behind me, expecting there to be a badger right there. And typically there wasn't. But when I turned back, there was a badger sat half a meter in front of me, just staring at me. And I sat there thinking, oh my God, what do I do? Typically, the badger was too close for me to actually get any pictures, but I was still violently jabbing on my shutter button, desperately trying to get some pictures. And it was only about 30 to 45 seconds where he was sat there, and it felt like a lifetime. My heart was palpitating, I was shaking, I was thinking, this is awesome. From that moment on, captivated. I cannot get enough of these guys. And Luna is the most gentle sweetheart ever. And she passes this temperament on to her cubs. So even if they are being an absolute menace, and believe me, they are children, they will be menaces. She never snaps at them. She never shows any aggression. She'll just basically tickle them and groom them until they calm down. She kills them with kindness, essentially. And it is such a privilege to be able to watch these cubs grow from being a tiny fuzzy pom-pom that can't walk straight, trips over their own feet, and watching them develop and grow. And Bear was one of those badgers that I was able to watch from the first time he emerged above ground during the day. I watched him develop into this incredible mature adult badger. He had a wonderful bulky head. He was quite a bold badger, and he was absolutely stunning. And it's quite funny how quickly they develop. So often when they're younger, they have quite a slender face, and it's very, very difficult to pick out the differences between them. But you can see here, so this is actually Bear when he was younger in the back. And this is Bear when he was 1.5 years old. So on the left is Luna, she's still the mum. And on the right, you can see that Bear still absolutely loves a bit of a cuddle and a bit of a groom. One of the ways that badgers develop and maintain their social bonds is by grooming and preening one another. It might be difficult to believe that they actually pride themselves on keeping clean. They don't want ticks, they don't want fleas, they don't want there to be annoying bits of dirt in their fur, so they actually need a friend's help to be able to reach the areas that they can't get to. And it's a behaviour that happens pretty much every single night, but it's an absolute pain to photograph because badgers are nocturnal. They are active at night, not during the day. So you can guarantee whenever I would observe this, it was too dark to take photos, or they did it behind a badger, or a bush, or a tree, or a hill. It was consistently a pain in the backside. And that's one of the reasons why I go back time and time and time again. Because the more time you're there with them, the more opportunity you have to hopefully get some awesome pictures. And I mentioned with the water voles that I actually do some remote photography. I love to do that with badgers as well, because I can't just sit there bang smack in the open and hope to get some good photos. But what I can do is put my camera there, sit back and control it. And badgers are highly curious animals. So if you look quite closely in the eye, you can actually see the reflection of the camera. And he was basically just checking out the camera. What's this? This is interesting. This is new. It's a little bit annoying when he knocked it. It rolled down the hill. I couldn't take any more photos for the rest of the day. But using this remote photography can give you new opportunities for pictures when you can't actually get closer yourself. And this is another example. So this is, who is this? This is Aku as he was leaving the set. It was an absolutely glorious evening. And you can see the entrance is literally just there. So I can't physically sit there. But what I can do is pop the camera there, sit back, get my iPad out and control everything remotely. So it allows you to get new unique perspectives on these wonderful animals. But for me, I try not to be biased with which badger I love the most, but one of the top 3 contenders is definitely this sweetheart, and she is called Lissa. Now, for the first couple of years that I was working with them, I always sat in the same position. I was quite far back. I was nowhere near a badger path. There was no reason for the badgers to go over there. So it meant I could just sit, be a silent observer, and hopefully get good pictures. But then the time came when Lissa emerged. Now, Lissa was one of 4 siblings, and from the get-go, it was clear that she was quite a spunky individual. One of her other siblings was actually Bear. And she was very adventurous, and she liked to do some exploring. And one summer's evening, she decided to go and do some exploring right up to my feet. And I was sat there thinking, oh, this has never happened before. What do I do? But she brought her 3 siblings along with her. her braveness obviously rubbed off on them. And from that point onwards, my relationship with the badgers changed. She knew there was something interesting and different in that part. So she would consistently come on over and check me out and check the camera out and check the tripod feet out. I tried moving and that didn't help. She knows where I am. From that point onwards, I was no longer a silent photographer. They knew I was there. And it got to the point where they would frequently come right up to me, just snuffle around me. Sometimes they would actually go to sleep next to me. And there is no way to express how incredible that feels when a little cub just rolls next to you and has a little bit of a snooze. So I have a lot to thank with Lissa for how she changed my relationship with them. Now, obviously, there was a little bit of controversy this year, and that came in the form of the badger cull. Now, last year, the badger cull was due to come to Derbyshire, but it was stopped at the very last second. Unfortunately, that didn't happen this year. And I know that this particular family of badgers was targeted. Now, it's very, very difficult to know this when I've spent so much time with them. I have become emotionally invested in them. I did my absolute best to try not to, but when you spend so much time with them and when you observe such incredible behavior, you just can't help it. So with the lockdown at the start of the year and then the cull at the end of the year, it severely limited the time that I could spend with them this year. And when the cull was fully announced, and unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, the cull boundaries were also leaked, I could see that the badgers were in the zone, and it was a massive blow. Badgers are blamed quite heavily for the spread of bovine tuberculosis. There's a lot of conflicting information and research out there, but in my eyes, I really can't justify the mass scale culling of these animals. And again, it's one of the reasons why I just want to take them home and protect them. They are just incredible. And I still haven't been able to bring myself to go and check out the set. I really want to put cameras back up to see how they're doing. I'm hoping and praying that none of them ended up at the end of a gun, but I'm not going to truly ever know. This winter, the cubs from 2019 were due to leave, so they would naturally disappear across winter anyway. But I'm really hoping that badgers like Luna, Mackie, some of the established adult badgers who don't leave, I'm really hoping that they are still okay. And I was actually going to put up cameras this month to go and see them. But lockdown happened and I can't go there at the moment. So I'm hoping that in December, if lockdown stops, I'm going to get cameras back out there. I want to know if these guys are okay, because it's going to be pretty devastating if I find out that this set has become inactive. We can only speculate. I've spoken to quite a few people who are far more knowledgeable than I. Given the number of holes, given how expansive this particular set is, it's suspected that it's over 100 years old. So for them to have been living there for so long and to be wiped out in a single 6-week stint would be completely devastating. But I live in hope, and I know these guys are extraordinarily resilient. And throughout the Peak District, we do have a healthy, expansive population of badgers. So God forbid if the worst has happened, hopefully there will be other badgers to take their place. And I'm always trying to explore and find new locations, find new badger families, because I do find that they are all incredibly unique. No two badgers behave the same way. No two clans behave the same way. Some clans can be extremely elusive. They won't emerge until it's pitch black. Other clans, such as this one, do come out earlier, and they do give me the unique opportunity to photograph them. And this particular image is my personal favourite from the project so far. And this is Lissa when she was 1.5 years old. So you can see she grew quite a bit between 6 months and about 1.5 years old. And this was a particular behaviour that I'd been desperate to photograph for a long, long time. And again, badgers do this quite frequently. They'll sit on their backside and they'll give their belly a good scratch. One of the little quirks about them, they absolutely love a good itch and scratch. So just like a household pet or a dog, they actually lick the air out of enjoyment if they manage to scratch the right spot. So I knew they did it all the time, but again, it was notoriously difficult to actually capture in a photo. It's as if Lissa knew I was having this struggle and she popped herself down in the perfect place. There were a couple of badgers in the foreground, but they knew it was their turn to leave. And she started grooming right in front of me, giving me a great opportunity to finally capture this behaviour. But it might seem like with badgers, you know, you turn up, you take some photos, hopefully you get what you're after. Photographing badgers is an absolute pain in the bum. It goes wrong far more often than it goes right. This was using the remote camera. I positioned it quite nicely, and again, a curious badger comes along, gives it a good snuffle, it rolls down the hill, and all I could do for the rest of the evening is watch on the iPad thinking, please don't break it, please don't. Badgers, usually you will find elder trees around the sets. Badgers do change the ecology in the surroundings where they live. They change the acidity of the soil, for example. So you will often find elder trees where badgers live or have been historically. And I didn't realize they were quite good at climbing. But the great thing is they know they can climb up, but they don't think about how am I actually going to get back down at the end. So this poor cub got up there, thought this is awesome, I'm really nice and high up, and thought, oh, I don't know how to get down. So he ended up literally just dropping like a stone, hit the ground. Luckily the ground was only 2 feet down, and he pretty much went and tried to do it again. He tried to climb straight back up. So they're quite special, even though they're intelligent. And this particular sequence absolutely killed me. It was really, really nice interaction between Luna on the left and Shadow on the right. And typically there was a bush right in front. So even though it was such a sweet sequence, it was lovely to see the interaction between the cub and the mum. The bush ruined every single photo. And I can't just go and pull up the bushes and trim them. So I kind of just have to deal with it and accept that the badgers know I'm a photographer. They know I want a photo. They will make my life difficult because I don't work with animals and children, unfortunately. And when people hear that there's bluebells in the woods, they think, awesome, must get some cracking photos of badgers and bluebells. Yeah, no. Guaranteed every single time there will be a bluebell directly in front of the badger's eyeball. And even if the badger moves 3 feet to the side, the bluebell will uproot itself and follow the eyeball. As a photographer, you don't want things across the eye. And this one killed me because you can see in the background, the bluebells were actually twice the height of a badger. But this little sausage decided to sit in front of the only badger height bluebell. So yeah, it's actually a pain in the bum more than it is a good thing, but I'm hoping I will eventually succeed in the photos that I want. And this is Lissa again. All I wanted to do, I was remotely controlling that camera. I wanted a photo of the badgers in the foreground and me, the photographer, in the background. Typically, she had other ideas. She didn't read the manual. She thought I didn't know what I was doing, so she tried to change all the settings. She ended up bumping the Wi-Fi off, so I lost control of the camera again. And I just had to sit back and think, please don't break it. Please don't. She didn't. Everything was absolutely fine, but it was quite amusing to watch. And it's not just badgers where things go wrong. As a wildlife photographer, you're guaranteed you're going to go home most of the time, I'm going to say 85% of the time, with failures or nothing at all. You're going to have bum shots. You're going to have shots where I mean, I don't even know what I did here. I focused on the wrong thing. Everything went a bit wrong. You can't always anticipate what the animals are going to do when a very excitable male darts in and all hell breaks loose. And we're going to finish with Hamish and that behaviour that I mentioned earlier. I always knew it was him. He had just such a goofy, unique personality. And I often really enjoy capturing images when animals look a little bit goofy and a little bit special, because I find that's when their true personality truly shines through in the photos. So I will love Hamish forever for the wonderful encounters he gave me, along with all of the other species that we have here in the Peak District. And with lockdown, obviously everything's a little bit, but if you can still get out and you can still get out to observe the wildlife that we have here, I highly recommend you do so. If you come across a grouse, just sit there and you'll see that they are really quirky birds. If you come across a badger, God forbid, please just watch them. You will fall in love with them the way that I have fallen in love with them. But how am I doing on time? I've done it. I've hit the timer. So that's the end of the talk. But thank you ever so much, guys, for attending this evening. And I am more than happy to be bombarded with questions if you have any. But otherwise, thank you so much, guys.
So thank you very much indeed, Tesni. Who's got questions for Tes? And if you want to unmute yourself by using your space bar, then that's probably the thing to do.
It's fine if not.
One question, Tes. Are there any predators for badgers at all, other than humans?
No, not really. If it was a fully natural environment and we had the species we should technically have, badgers would sometimes be predated by wolves. They're one of those species where they don't have any true natural predator. They're kind of a self-sustaining population. So if the food availability is there, the population will be there, but you kind of have natural fluctuations as time goes on. So yes, there are. I've seen documented, oh gosh, what was it? There's been cats that have predated badgers. I've seen trial camera footage of that. But in the UK, we have nothing. A fox won't go for them. Badgers will kill each other sometimes, which isn't very nice. But their biggest problem is people and roads. Over 50,000 a year are killed on our roads alone. So that kind of manages the population a bit as well.
Tesni, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
I'm quite interested that you said that when the cull happened, that you, or at some point you said that you didn't want to get emotionally you didn't want to get emotionally involved with the animals. I mean, every other word has been love, adore, cherish. I want to take them home in my car. You know, there's a kind of profound love for nature, but I'm interested in the very idea that you want to take emotion out of your relationship with animals. Why did you say that?
Because of what's happened. I am an emotional person. I do love wildlife, but for 3+ years I've been trying to mentally prepare myself for the cull, because I kind of always knew it was going to come, and I didn't want to be an emotional wreck, basically. So I did my absolute best to emotionally detach myself temporarily, because the reality is I was thinking about them every night, praying that they were okay. So it's me trying to do what I can't do, which is trying to temporarily switch the emotions off, because
Yes.
I know that
Do you think
the reality is quite harsh.
Do you think there's anything? Do you think there's any necessity to, or any merit in taking emotion out of your encounter?
No. Personally, other than not getting upset about things, I don't, because I feel like if you're passionate about a subject, it will shine through in your work and in your images. So my personal opinion is it's good to have some attachment or some interest in the subject. But yeah, it's just that the harsh reality of nature is things go wrong. So when things go wrong, I try desperately to become less emotionally attached for the time.
You think to understand nature properly, you have to actually take emotion out of your relationship? Because, as you say, and very often we talk about the sort of relentless and impersonal nature of the natural environment, that it isn't one driven by culture and the kinds of feelings of affection, etc., that it is if you like, red in tooth and claw. But I just wondered if you felt there was a contradiction between our perception of nature as something that is autonomous and drained of feeling, and our own engagement with it.
I think it's down to the individual. I know that there are some people who work with wildlife who are just no emotion. This is wildlife. I'm here to document it. I'm here to get it. I feel that it's impossible for me to do that, but I also think it's important when you have an emotional attachment to try not to allow that to sort of blind you to reality. So, for example, the badger cull, I do not approve of it or agree with it in any way, but that is because I've read the papers, I've done the research, I've spoken to the experts. If I felt like the cull was needed and was working, I would accept it even though I didn't like it, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important not to let your love and your attachment to the wildlife to distract you from the reality, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But it's a tough one. I'm a girl. I'm going to be stereotypical. I'm a girl. I can't help it. When you spend so much time with the animals, you naturally develop some affection for it, unless it bites you or does something nasty, which has luckily never happened.
Hi, Tesni. Oh, sorry, Simon.
That's right. You go, Keely. You go first.
Paper, scissors.
It's not a girl thing, Tesni. I've helped with the vaccination programme for 3 years and been monitoring the cull in Cheshire for 3 years and the Derbyshire cull for a year. And it's a big dilemma whether you put your own mental health on the line by trying to protect badgers and other wildlife, or you put your mental health on the line by not doing anything. So whatever you do, it's very difficult. But I always feel better. You're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't. But I always feel better in myself if I've done my very best, to protect badgers from what I'd consider thoroughly wicked, evil government policy.
I agree.
Tesni, I have a question. Just checking that I'm not muted. You're talking this evening to people who are likely to be entranced by your lovely photography. What opportunities do you have, if any, to share them with people who perhaps haven't had the opportunity either to see this sort of wildlife themselves or to be shown such a display of the beauty of our offering?
So, I mean, obviously I do try and, I recognise that as a photographer and a wildlife photographer, I am quite blessed in so much that I do see and observe things in the natural world that many people will never have the pleasure of seeing. So I try, obviously the photography is a job, but it's also a passion, and I'm very passionate about trying to get more people interested and involved with the natural world. So I do hope that my photos give some people an insight to things they won't usually see. But I also do, obviously I do the photography workshops and all of that for work, but I also do guiding, because there are people who want to see wildlife who don't want to photograph it, they just want to see and observe it. So sometimes I do take people out, because things like mountain hares, not always that easy to see or get close to. So it can be really rewarding when I can get somebody up close and they can see and observe the animals. I do try and do a bit of video as well, because I think that video is very immersive. So again, if people can see these things that not many people see, hopefully it engages them and gets them more interested in having more of a involvement or just getting out and about. So the Badger Diaries Instagram was done purely because I wanted to change people's perspective and opinion on them. There were too many people saying badgers, oh, TB, dirty, aggressive, horrible. And I wanted to say, no, that's not what badgers are. Here, photos, videos, engagement, this is what badgers are actually like. And a lot of people have messaged me saying, you know, I didn't really care about badgers and now I actually love them. Thank you for showing us what they're actually like. So it's actually a really rewarding side of things when people message with stuff like that.
That's great. More strength to your arm. Other questions?
Tesni, you've described you've said you aren't ever bored, but you've also given a sense that you spend many hours when the wildlife isn't showing and that nothing is happening. And I'm just wondering, do you have techniques for surviving through those hours? Are you in a state of karma, or do you take headphones, or how do you manage those hours?
So with certain things, I am highly impatient, and I'm not the kind of person who can just sit and do nothing for hours and hours and hours. But I think it's the anticipation that something could happen at any moment. The badgers could be not coming out, and then all of a sudden you can actually hear them underground, and I'll hear a thud underground, and you get all excited thinking, finally, like all that time, they're finally coming out, and you'll see a little nose twitching and emerging from the set. I do usually, if what I'm doing does not require me being able to hear, mountain hares, for example, I usually have music on because it helps. But I guess I just kind of get into a zone where it's just appreciating being out, being in the natural world. Just because nothing's in front of me that I'm out to photograph doesn't mean that there's not other things to appreciate and see and observe. So I just try and, it's important to be able to detach yourself from the modern world and being in the town and the city and the cars and and people all the time. So sometimes it's just like peace. I can just I can't hear any cars. There's no people. This is beautiful. So sometimes that's as important as the photography. And I think that really helps when animals are mugging me off for hours and hours and hours.
I heard in a recent Autumn Watch programme that you can get white badgers. Are these albinos and mutations? Do you know anything about it?
I do. I've actually photographed some in the Peak District. They're called, I believe the ones on Autumn Watch were erythristic. It is a mutation, which basically means the pigment is not, in the fur is not as strong, so it comes out more gingery. So you can have badgers that are very dark ginger all the way up to, you can barely see the stripes on them. Most of them are not true albino, but you can get albino badgers where you'll have pink nose and pink eyes. They're incredibly rare. but they are around. So I think a study I read suggested about 10% of badgers in the UK are erythristic. I would probably dispute that. I don't think there's that many, but I know that there are genetic populations where you will find more, I just call them ginger badgers because erythristic is a mouthful. So the set where I was photographing them, there were 3 adults. There were 2 males and a female, and the female had 2 ginger cubs. So it's clearly in the genetics and they pass them on.
Right.
But they're beautiful. They are beautiful.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else like to ask a question? Any questions about the photography, any of the techniques that Tess is using, or the equipment that she's using? Anything?
I've just got a question about badgers, inevitably, if that's okay. Just one of the things I've observed in a couple of the sets that I've been looking at over the last 5 or 6 years or so is that the sows are very, they tend to share the duties looking after the cubs. I don't know if you've noticed that in your set, that they will, there's a set in particular where one in 2016 they had one sow had 3 cubs, one sow had a cub, and each sow would take it in turns to look after the 4 cubs while the other went off and fed, etc. I wonder if you've noticed a similar sort of behaviour.
Yes, so there are 2 permanent sows in this set. So there's Midnight and Luna. It's always a bit of a nightmare to figure out whose cubs are who, because one sow can have more. If a sow has 3 cubs, there could be 2 dads for each of those. So you can have cubs that look different from the same brood. So Midnight is the submissive sow. She doesn't emerge when Luna is above ground, but Luna has left her cubs with the subadults. So because they don't leave until 2 years of age, usually she would leave them with one of those while she headed off. But it's one of the things that fascinate me about badgers is they're all different. So there are some sets that I've observed with trail cameras where they've been quite aggy and not really liked each other very much, whereas there's sets like this one where they all get on like a house on fire and there's no aggression shown whatsoever. So I definitely think it happens, but at this particular set I've never observed Luna leaving them with Midnight, because Midnight is definitely submissive and you just don't get them together. I don't know why, because Luna's not aggressive, but maybe they're aggressive and I just don't see it.
And what role do the male badgers have in bringing up the cubs? Do they have a role?
So from what I've observed, there are 2 males that I know of, 2 adult males. There's Mackie and, oh, goodness me, my brain's gone. There's another adult male. Mackie doesn't really interact with the cubs, but Mackie is definitely a bit of a feisty one. He has no ears left. He's really scarred up all over his face. So I think he's had quite a lot of territorial fights, and he obviously gets himself into a bit of trouble. And he's quite shy as well, so he stays away from the cubs. Whereas the other adult male, I've not seen him very often, but when he comes out, the cubs go wild. They want to play with him, they want to interact, they want cuddles, they want love. So again, I think it's on an individual basis, but there's definitely a family role in it. It's like I say, Luna is the mum, but she'll happily let the other badgers play and groom and interact with the cubs if she wants to go and do something else. And they definitely love that other boy.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? I'm intrigued by your ability to use your mobile phone to control your camera. Maybe I'm it's the generation gap. I don't have a clue how to do that. Is it difficult?
So I shoot with Olympus system, and it's an inbuilt, you can basically you link it to your phone. It will show you exactly what the camera can see. You can control it, you can take pictures. But with most DSLR cameras, you need to buy adapters that are a couple of £100. So most cameras don't allow you to do it straight out of the box, but I would say it's a form of photography that's very enjoyable and gives you opportunities that you can't have if you're physically behind the camera. So I suspect it will be more integrated in cameras in the future.
Very good. Thank you.
Always.
Yes, badgers, as you say, they're our largest predator. What sort of other animals do they predate on? I know they've got a reputation for consuming hedgehogs, ground nesting birds, etc. What sort of range do they go for?
So they are omnivores and they are opportunistic. So the majority of their diet comes from earthworms. They can eat 200, 300, 400 in a single night. And if you know what you're looking for, you'll find snuffle holes. And sometimes if you're lucky, at the bottom of the snuffle hole, there'll be a little hole, and it's where the badger has sucked up the earthworm like spaghetti. So it's one of the quirks that they do. So earthworms are the majority. They will eat carrion. They will eat berries. They'll eat nuts. They'll eat roots. Yes, they will eat eggs if they come across them. Yes, they will eat hedgehogs. However, I believe it is a learnt behaviour. Usually you can tell if a hedgehog's being eaten by a badger because they curl the skin inside out. Personally, I have never ever seen this in the Peak District. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means I've never come across it. But I would argue the main competition between hedgehogs and badgers is they both eat worms. So it's very easy for them to happily coexist. But it does happen. I can't deny it. It does happen, but I do believe it's a learnt behaviour that's passed on through clans. It's not something that's UK wide. But yeah, they pretty much eat whatever they can get their hands on. But worms are their favourites.
Can I just interrupt a minute, Tesni, about the hedgehog thing? My friend Vic Pearson, he started off the High Peak Badger Group in the 1980s, and he's spent thousands and thousands of hours monitoring badger sets. And he used to work for the Forestry Commission sort of people around Beuaitiful area. And in all those years, I mean, it probably must be talking about 40 or more years now, he's only ever come across the remains of 2 hedgehogs that had been eaten by a badger. As you said, the skins are just left turned inside out. And that was under a hedgerow in the Beuaitiful area during a very, very, very hard winter. And what he thinks happened, and I agree, is that the hedgehogs were probably hibernating, in leaves under a thick hedgerow. And the badgers, in the very harsh weather, were desperate to eat anything. But I've never come across it, and I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours monitoring badger sets. My friend Dave Brock has, Simon has, and I've never ever come across any real evidence for it. And I think a lot of this badgers kill hedgehogs stuff, it was triggered by an article on the Country File, which is a programme I detest because I think it's definitely anti-badger in its stance.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, I like I say, I don't deny that badgers can eat hedgehogs, but I do genuinely believe it is a learned behaviour that's passed on. And also, if they have the choice of earthworm or hedgehog, they want earthworm because earthworm is tasty and easy. So like you mentioned, it was a harsh winter. I would suspect that food was in short supply, and that's why the badgers ended up going for a hedgehog. But the main reason for the hedgehog decline is slug pellets. We are completely cutting off their roots. Any new houses these days have horrible concrete blocks for fences. They can't move around. They can't get to the normal habitat. So it's easy to blame badgers because certain people don't like badgers and they want to justify the cull. Whereas the reality is badgers and hedgehogs have coexisted for thousands of years. So it's very suspect that the badgers would just decide now, oh, we're going to eat every hedgehog we can see because it's an easy meal. But that's my opinion on it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions?
I'll just make a comment about your photography. I love your images, and this is the third time I've heard you speak. The last time was at Harrison Cameras in Sheffield, must have been over a year ago. And you're partly responsible for me changing from Canon to Olympus, spending a fortune, but it's the best thing I've ever done. Really.
Send me a bill in the post. No, thank you, Andy.
Well, I think it looks like we've come to the end of the questions. Tess, can I thank you so much for the talk that you've given us. I think everybody has loved both the images and also the storytelling that went with them. And I think we've been really privileged to have you give us the talk. So if people want to unmute themselves and just give a bit of applause to Tess, that might be